Hi, this is Len. Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles. My interview this week is with Clay Jenkinson, who has been the host for 25 years of the public radio show, The Thomas Jefferson Hour. I have to say, this was one of the most satisfying conversations I've had for a long time with a guest, and I won't say more than that. I'll just say I hope you're going to enjoy this conversation with Clay Jenkinson. I've also got some tech tips, some news, and a little comment on my generation, which comes at the end of the show. Got three tidbits of Amazon-related news for you this week. First is from John Aga, and it comes in a report at goodereader.com by Michael Kozlowski. He has picked up from sources in China, he does a lot of work with the supply chain over there, that there is a new Paperwhite 5 in the works, and that the key aspect of it that he's detected is that it will have the amber LED screen. This gives kind of a warm color, which the current Oasis 3 has already. It's quite pleasant. You can change it from the black and white or the sort of two-tone that we're used to on the Kindles to this kind of attractive amber color. It is likely to be announced between Prime Day, which Michael says is going to be in October sometime. That hasn't been announced, and Black Friday. But it could be delayed until early 2021 because of coronavirus. The last Paperwhite, the Paperwhite 4, came out in 2018. And his sources say that Amazon has been designing and testing this warm light Paperwhite for most of the year, but the manufacturing was delayed in China because of the virus. Second Amazon news story, Amazon Book Club's Early Access has been announced, and this is, so far there are 7 book clubs that are identified. There's one called Unforgettable Reads, and that's books we can't and won't stop recommending. The current book that group is reading is The Power of One by Bruce Courtney. You can find information about this at amazon.com/Amazon Book Clubs, and I'll have a link to it in the show notes. That is the most popular of these book clubs at this point. 3,736 members have signed up. And the second most popular is Things That Go Bump in the Night, Favorite Mysteries. And they're reading Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. The other topics of the 7 are romantic comedy, anti-racism, sci-fi fantasy, memoirs, and travel. I don't know exactly how these book clubs are going to work, but it's an interesting idea. I see some overlap with Goodreads, which of course Amazon owns, and where things fall between Goodreads and Goodreads would seem to be a logical place to form book clubs, and maybe they have that as part of it. But anyway, this is at Amazon, and if you want to join a book club, you can sign up and see what's going on there. The third item is a rebranding. Amazon Free Time and Free Time Unlimited. This is curated material for kids that's pretty well organized and gives parents a lot of control over what the kids are watching. They will now be known as Amazon Kids and Amazon Kids Plus. The pricing is the same. Kids is going to be free, and then Kids Plus is $2.99 a month if you're a Prime member, and it's $4.99 if you're not a Prime member. In the blog post which announced this, Amazon says they have more than 20 million parents using Free Time, which will now be known as Amazon Kids. And they are going to be adding a lot of content as they rebrand this thing. I have grandkids, and what I know is that my grandkids love to play on tablets. That's one of the things we've been doing with Ryan and Jake. They love to play Angry Birds, and they love to sort of surf around. I would not be comfortable leaving them with the tablets. I like being there to, I teach them that, well, there's an ad. You got to X that out because they're trying to get you to buy something, and they see that as part of the game. But for parents that want to have kids be able to have some time on their own, this interface with Amazon is pretty robust, and it looks like it's going to get freshened up under this new name. I came across an interesting tech tip at a site called phonearena.com, written by Cosmin Vasily on September 14th. And it's a way that you can have Alexa print things for you. The basic command to set it up, you have to have your Alexa device on the same Wi-Fi as your printer, and if that's the case, you simply say, Alexa, discover my printer, and once that's set up, you can give commands like, Alexa, print my shopping list. That's something you can, add things to just by talking to Alexa. There's also a to-do list that you can set up, so you could say, Alexa, print my to-do list, and beyond that, you can say, print a crossword puzzle, print a first grade edition worksheet, print a coloring page, print a chicken recipe, print lined paper so that you can write on it. And so it looks like it's the start of something that maybe gets much more robust. But it's one of these things you think, well, wait a minute, printing from Alexa, how does that work? Well, it's off and running now, and who knows where it will go. You can also set this up as an alternative to saying, Alexa, discover my printer. You can navigate to devices on your Alexa app on your phone, select plus, and then add device, and then choose printer. And pretty neat. The printer's at the other cottage, so I haven't had a chance to try this out, but I'm sure it works, and it might be something that's of benefit to you. Time now for the interview. Clay Jenkinson earned his BA degree in English Literature from the University of Montana in 1977 and proceeded as a Rhodes and Danforth Scholar to Oxford University, where in 1981 he earned bachelor's and master's degrees in English language and literature. He finished with first-class honors, which is no small deal at Oxford. For 25 years, he has portrayed America's third president in the Thomas Jefferson Hour. That's a weekly public radio program and podcast. Clay this year published a book titled Repairing Jefferson's America, A Guide to Civility and Enlightened Citizenship. I've read it. It's a good book. A lot of interesting information about Jefferson and quite a statement of vision and mission that Clay draws from it. A native and current resident of Bismarck, North Dakota, Clay is director at the Dakota Institute, which makes documentary films, publishes books at Dakota Institute Press, and hosts humanities events about the Great Plains. Kindle Chronicles listener Brian Person is a fan of the Thomas Jefferson Hour, and he's the one who suggested that I invite Clay for an interview. We connected by Skype on Tuesday, September 15th, between Maine and North Dakota. I began by asking what prompted Clay in 1984 to begin his long and fruitful engagement with the life and work of Thomas Jefferson.
It's turned out to be maybe the central relationship of my life, except with respect to my daughter, Catherine. The director of the North Dakota Humanities Council, one of the 50 state humanities councils, called me. I was at an airport heading to London, and it was the white courtesy telephone. So I thought, I'd never had one of those calls before. I thought someone must be hurt or dead. And it was my friend, and he said, I'm writing a grant to the NEH, and it'll be a conference, and I want you to portray Thomas Jefferson if we get the grant. It seemed like a moronic idea to me, frankly, but I said, sure, because I knew he wouldn't get the money. And then he got it, and he held me to it. And so I rented a costume, and I didn't have to do much. This was a really small thing. And so I suited up, and I'm not from a theater background at all. I'm uncomfortable, in fact, even to this day, in tights and buckles and so on. But I did it, and then I thought, oh, this Jefferson, this is Renaissance man. He knows wine, he knows architecture, he knows library classification. Yeah, he's an archaeologist. He sent the Lewis and Clark expedition, and he's a statesman. He's one of the great letter writers in American history. I can attach myself to this guy and continue lifelong education.
Had you done historical impersonations of other people before him?
No,
or was
never.
He the first?
Never. I never was involved in theater. It's not a way I see the world. And I wasn't even a historian. I'm a literature scholar by training. And so, I don't know why he asked me to do this, except we were close friends. And so this was my first character. I now do, I suppose, 7 or 8. I've done 15, but some of them are sort of one-offs. But I got interested in it, and I'll tell you why. It's one thing to lecture about somebody, but it's another thing to embody that person. And so if you asked me a question, say, what was Jefferson's attitude towards Native Americans? I could talk about that for, minutes or hours. But if you ask Jefferson, what's your attitude, Mr. President, on Native Americans? Now I have to see the world as he saw it, and I have to try to make sense of what we know he wrote. I have to embody those things, even if I fundamentally disagree with them, even if I think that they're blind spots in his outlook, or whether he's a hypocrite or a racist or whatever, an imperialist. I can't let that be known through the character, because everyone is the hero of his own story. And so that's really an important thing, because it makes you as a historian, makes me as a historian, project my imagination into somebody else's way of looking at the world in a way that I would never have to from the outside in.
That's fascinating. Have you studied the work of other people who have had a similar relationship with a historic? I'm thinking of Hal Holbrook did a similar thing with Mark Twain. Did you learn anything about this kind of magical move that people make when they start speaking in the first person of a historical character?
I have. I've seen him twice, Hal Holbrook as in Mark Twain tonight, and, he's still at it. It's amazing. He's been at it for 40 years. At some point, he became Mark Twain. I know that sounds a little mystical, but it's true. At some point, he became Mark Twain, and so he doesn't have to think about it anymore. He just stands up in his white suit, and it just comes out. He's memorized scads of Samuel Clemens, but he really is Twain in some really fundamental ways. And I would say this: I am Thomas Jefferson, and I am Meriwether Lewis, and I am Theodore Roosevelt, and maybe a few others. And when I say that, here's what I mean. You read so much that it starts to, it's like when you are studying a foreign language and you have a dream in French or you have a dream in Italian. It's suddenly, I know that if you ask me any question about these 3 or 4 people I know so well, I wouldn't have to think about it. It's just, I know what they would say. And so there's a way you start to embody it. And, it's a danger here, because I think that there's a limit to whether that can really be fundamentally true. But yes, and so I've studied the best of them. Now there are the worst of them too, and I've studied them too. I don't have a script. I don't memorize my monologue. What I did for the Chautauqua movement, it's called sort of the modern Chautauqua movement, is I did 2 things. I said these have to be unscripted monologues. You have to stand up in front of whatever that group is, and you have to formulate it as you go, as if you were actually that person. And secondly, you must take questions in character, and you can't ask for them in advance. You have to so master your character that you know what they would say. And then the third thing is you have to break character. You have to stop being Mark Twain or Abigail Adams, and you have to step out and say, all right, I'm a scholar, not that person, and here's how I prepared, or when you asked that question, I answered it in a certain way, but it could have gone in a different direction, and here's what we don't know, so that you have to contextualize, and you have to break the illusion, because when I speak as Lewis or Jefferson or Thomas, or as Theodore Roosevelt or J. Robert Oppenheimer, for that matter, I often have to say things that I fundamentally object to as a human being. And so I want the audience never to go away with some kind of naive view that this is how this person sees the world. I want them to think that's how a historical character saw the world, but the guy who inhabited that character also was able to provide some context.
Yeah, and I think in your podcast you do that. You answer questions of your host as Jefferson, and then when you step back out of character, there was something. It's kind of like waking up from a dream, or it's a very kind of exciting moment for the listener to see you make that transition, because now you're sort of on my side of the conversation and you're looking at Jefferson kind of the way I am as someone who isn't Jefferson. So that seems like, is it difficult to to make that shift when you?
No, it's a relief. If I'm performing, I pull off my wig or I do something to show. If I'm Roosevelt, I take off my monocle or whatever, because I'm relieved because I'm no longer stuck. And in a certain very limited sense, I have more to say than the character about that issue. And also, I'm no longer stuck in their world, and I can sort of take a sigh and then go back and start to do it. And I think the audience really needs that, because then they realize, oh, there is a distance between the actor or the performer and the character she or he is performing. And we're looking at a piece of history here. This is kind of a living text. We're not looking at a definitive answer to anything. And it's even more important if I break character and I say, man, you really flummoxed me with that question, because on the one hand, Roosevelt could look at it this way. On the other hand, he could look at it that way, and I had to decide. And so I just want you to know that I don't feel definitive about this, whereas I would about X and Y and Z. Yeah. And then they go away. I think that adds to the credibility and the authenticity of the project.
When you're answering a question or channeling Jefferson, do you ever sense his spirit judging you harshly as you're saying whatever you're saying, that he's saying, no, Clay, that's not quite right, or you get an uneasiness versus when you're in the flow and you have a pretty high confidence that this is really how he might answer a question?
Yes. A couple of things. One is that I wish that I could have a light display behind me that would register my certainty. So there'd be like 5 lights if I know there's no other way to see this. And there'd be 3 lights.
Winging it.
Right, and there'd be 1 light if I'm on pretty shaky ground here, don't ask any follow-up question, or there may be another way of seeing this. I wish that could happen, and I would be pushing those like a guitarist with his foot pedal, because I want the audience to feel the complexity. I don't overdo the costume. I don't want people to think, oh, look, Thomas Jefferson. I want them to think, oh, look, that guy's pretending to be Thomas Jefferson. I don't think it's fair to sophisticate this until the audience forgets that you are just some guy who read a biography. And so I sort of object to the Williamsburg model of getting too deep into the character. I always try to deliberately make sure I break that wall a little bit. And I sometimes do think, like when I'm answering a question, I think, whoa, wait a minute, there's that other thing. I wonder if Jefferson would be upset with the way I'm answering that. Or even more, if someone asks me a personal question, tell me about the death of your wife, Mr. Jefferson, I'll answer that. But he wouldn't. And so then I think, well, I'm not really being true to this guy. I mean, he would probably say, I'm sorry, I'm feeling a migraine headache coming on, and quietly leave. So I'm aware of it. On the other hand, I thought your question might go in a slightly different direction, but in a sense it did. I get upset by some questions. I feel like I'm indignant on Jefferson's behalf, and I think that I'm up there doing this, and my feelings are a little hurt, or I'm indignant, and I think, what? I'm just some guy in tights. What's it to me whether this person is being rude to Thomas Jefferson or is mischaracterizing Jefferson's view of things? Why do I take that personally? And then I think, maybe you're getting too deep in here, buddy.
Yeah, you've drunk the Jefferson Kool-Aid.
Yeah, I mean, you do. But I do. I feel like someone asks a snarky question, and I think, that wasn't very nice. Why wouldn't you just ask a question? And then I think, wait a minute, I don't want to sleep in costume. I don't want to order pizza in costume. I don't want to fly in costume.
Yeah. Well, you had a particularly intense experience doing this in 1994 when you presented Jefferson to William Jefferson Clinton and Mrs. Clinton at the White House. And did some of these things come into play when you came out of character, or did what was Clinton's reaction? It's fascinating to me to even imagine.
Yeah, well, let me first say that I was thrilled. What an honor. It was the 250th birthday of Jefferson. I was invited to present. What a tremendous honor it was. There were a couple of hundred people there. The Clintons were there. I sat at a table with Mrs. Clinton. He was at the next table. I got to present within 10 feet of him. I had to decide what to say because I had a limited amount of time, and I knew that the most important person on earth was listening. A couple of things about that. One is that I said I knew he was a Rhodes Scholar and studied at Oxford. And Jefferson once said that the only reason to go for a young man to go to Europe is to drink, to box, and to whore. I didn't dare say quite all of that. This is before the Monica Lewinsky story, but we all knew that this was an issue. And so I tiptoed around that a little bit, and I could see him getting a little edgy, but I thought it was fun, and of course the audience was on my side. But then he got a little weird, not about that, but he stood up and said, I asked about the Lewis and Clark expedition, and I answered, and he said, well, you could send out people like this because there was still a world to be explored. But I mean, how could we do this in our time when the world has all been explored? And I thought, well, come on, first of all, you've got other things you can think about. But secondly, you don't whine about this, Mr. President. I mean, you're sending people to the moon, to Mars, to the end of the universe, where Lewis and Clark would never have thought that the Mariana Trench was 5 miles deep or 7 miles deep. We're exploring things on the macro and micro level that Lewis and Clark and Jefferson could never even have dreamed about. And so I felt that, I'm a big admirer of the president, of course, but I felt that he was being a little literal in wishing that there was a Montana to explore when we're way beyond all that.
Interesting. So was that a question he asked, and then you had to answer it as Jefferson?
Right. And then
he
was
dress him down a little, or
I did. You got to be careful, not just because he's the president, but because I'm in character. So I said, I'm sure that there are still worlds to explore. That we dreamed. We didn't know how big the solar system was. We didn't know We didn't even know if there were other islands of major importance in the South Pacific. We hadn't taken down the vocabularies of all the native peoples that we met. And so just like there's an open end here, Mr. President. But of course, you're also watching the clock, and you're not just performing for the President of the United States, you're performing for 200 other people. And by the way, Carl Sagan was there. It was one of the greatest moments of my life. I got there early, and he got there early. And so here we are alone. And I'm Jefferson, and he's Carl Sagan. And so he starts talking with me. And it turned out within minutes, I realized he knew as much about Thomas Jefferson as I did, and maybe more. And Jefferson wasn't even one of his interests. And I thought, now this is what it is to be in the presence of genius.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Maybe give a feel for what listeners will hear if they tune in, when you started it, the reach of it, the number of stations. Let's just describe that.
There are 50 or 60 stations around the country, fewer than I would like. The podcast is actually a much bigger thing. I started it a long time ago, 30 years ago, or 25 anyway. I went to the Bohemian Grove out in Northern California. It's kind of a Redwood Men's Club for Henry Kissinger and David Gergen, people like that. Oh. And they have it's a marvelous place. And so I performed out there, and some guy came up to me afterwards and said, would you like to do a radio show on this in Reno? And so I did. It was on a commercial station. And then that was so interrupted by, commercials for gold bond medicated powder and buy gold because the economy is about to collapse, that we moved to public radio, and I've been on it ever since, and it's been great. I wish we had I wish I had a bigger megaphone, frankly, because I believe, and as you know, I've written this new book on Jefferson, Repairing Jefferson's America. I believe that what's missing in our national discourse is the Jeffersonian, not Jefferson. We get that he was a slaveholder and so on and so forth, but the Jeffersonian: civility, harmony, science, fact-based politics, majority rule, self-actualization, a belief in moderation, a belief that the people are up to the challenge of self-government, a belief that we need to disseminate education more and more widely in order to make this thing work, a belief in limited government, or certainly targeted government. Those things are largely forgotten or caricatured in our time, and I think that Jefferson is maybe not the answer, but he's one of the answers to the current paralysis. And so that's why I wrote Repairing Jefferson's America. But if the program were on 600 radio stations, if I had the reach of Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or somebody like that, I think it could have an effect, because the program that I do has brought a lot of people some solace in a time of madness. And I get these letters all the time, like, wow, you guys speak with complete sentences. You have grammar. You're civil. You're decent. You argue in a logical way. We need that, and we're desperately deficient in all of that. And so I wish that I could get this out in a massive way, because I think that that Jefferson is the voice of what a republic really looks like, for all of his personal foibles and faults. And so I love it, and it's a discipline. I do 52 programs a year. That's a lot. That's one every single week. We don't take a break. I just did, in fact, 2 today before talking with you. You see me, not exactly, I know this is radio, but I'm not exactly wearing a costume. It's it's radio, and so I would do more of it if I could. I don't ever intend to quit, although something is happening. There is because of the chaos of this moment, the attack on monuments and attack on historical figures, including Jefferson, and also the backlash that's occurring in every direction. I think for some stations, I'm too liberal, even though I'm Jefferson, because I think that Donald Trump, we've gotten this far into this conversation without using that word. He has so galvanized and disturbed the equilibrium of our culture that he's forced us to talk about him. You don't have to talk about Barack Obama. You don't have to talk about George Herbert Walker Bush, but he forces us to make him the center of our discourse. And so people say to me every single day, what would Jefferson think about Donald Trump? And the answer is, of course, we don't know, but trying to figure that Jefferson could ever find much to admire in Donald Trump is a hard thing, because his commitment to civility and so on. So it's forced me to take a stand when I don't really want to. I'd rather talk about other things, but I do frankly think, not to get too grave here, but I think we're living through one of the pivotal moments in American history right now. And it is not clear to me whether the Republic survives. It's not just Trump, but the world that produced Trump. And I don't just mean the Trumpites, the paralysis, the anger, the rage, the mutual suspicion, the blue and the red, the belief by each side that the other side is an enemy to the future of this country. Whatever has caused us to get into that really dark space is threatening the future of American democracy. I know that sounds insanely dramatic, but I think it's true. And so I think we have to talk about this. If you're doing the Thomas Jefferson Hour and you don't talk about the elephant of elephants in the room, and that is whether there will be a smooth transition between November 3rd and January 21st, either way, I think I never thought that sentence would come out of my mouth in the whole course of my life. I never thought we would be talking about the possibility of armed militias in the streets, depending on how the election comes out, or maybe in whichever way the election comes out. And so I'm heartbroken. I'll just say I'm heartbroken.
You have an interesting anecdote in the book where you made a presentation and Joe Biden was at it. And after the presentation on Jefferson, he congratulated you, but he said, Jefferson is closer to Pat Buchanan than he is to the modern Democratic Party. We've evolved. From what you just said, would you disagree with Biden that Jefferson is somehow close to Pat Buchanan, who I would equate with sort of the Trump wing of the party, and therefore he might have supported not Trump's lack of civility, but small government and some of these other things that a Pat Buchanan might have been working for in a more civil way slightly than Trump?
Yeah, it's a question of interpretation. So, I can portray Jefferson as kind of a modern liberal, which he might be, or I can portray him as he actually was. And so I chose to portray him as he actually was. So that means states' rights, limited government, no national debt, no FEMA, no Social Security, no welfare state. You're kind of on your own. That government is best which governs least. And so this is what I love about Joe Biden. He came up afterwards and he said, man, he likes to use the word man, man, you're Pat Buchanan. And it's true. So the Democratic Party is no longer Jeffersonian in any of those senses. And I do believe that Jefferson is right that we should have real suspicion about government's capacity to answer human challenges. I think Jefferson understood something, but he lived then and we live now. I think that there was an article written in the 50s by Clinton Rossiter called "Which Jefferson Do You Quote?" And he discerned that there are 7 different Jeffersons, and you get to quote the one that happens to fit. And so the idea that government is best which governs least, and the national government of the United States has no obligation to the people beyond refereeing, I think that's been lost. That's been gone for at least 100 years. And it's not coming back. And so I object to the libertarians who want to live in Jefferson's world. And you think, well, what would that look like? Would you get on a plane if there were no FAA? Would you get penicillin for your child if there were no Food and Drug Administration? I don't think they're telling the truth. I think that they're saying we need a lot less government. If that's what they're saying, I can understand it. If they're saying let the buyer beware, I'm not with them, because the world is so complex now. That we depend upon government to supervise a lot of what goes on in America. And if it didn't, it'd be absolute chaos. And it's chaos enough already. So I think Biden was right. And I loved it that he was listening so closely. Because, we had Jefferson-Jackson dinners, and the Democrats at that time used to think of themselves as the party of Jefferson and Jackson. Now they're distancing themselves from both of these.
Yeah, they renamed it this
distinguished
year.
men.
The renamed one in Iowa this year. There was a lot of commentary about it.
Well, and it's true.
It's the Liberty and Justice dinner now.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think Jefferson will survive this. I think that Jackson probably will too, although if I had to choose, I'm going to cling to Jefferson.
Well, you're a North Dakota native, and you went far from North Dakota, including to Oxford, and you returned. I detect quite a sense of calling and love of North Dakota, and saw that you, I think perhaps about the time that you returned in 2006, the energy industry was just it was a tsunami of growth, and it looked like, having ended 100 years of agrarian economy, you were now entering into an economy where perhaps North Dakota was going to have the highest per capita income of any state because of the energy. So a lot's changed in a decade. I'm curious, what's your view of the state that you love regarding energy and the economy in general at this point?
That's a great question. Let me just say I just finished a book. It'll be published in the midwinter. It's about North Dakota. It's a huge book. It's be 300 pages, I'm afraid. And it's called The Language of Cottonwood's Essays on the Future of North Dakota. And so I'm really trying to dig in on this. And so stop me, because I'll start to roll on about it. But we were an agrarian people, a family farm state. Now we're not really, because family farming is sort of no longer possible. We're moving in North Dakota to the first fully robotic farm in Cass County. It'll be a farm without farmers. And that's probably the future of agriculture. Drones and robotics and GPS systems that we can't even imagine yet. And it'll actually make our food production more efficient. But it'll take the culture out of agriculture. We're an energy extraction state. The Bakken oil boom made us one of the sweet spots of the oil business around the world. It got us rich, both personally and in our state coffers. It damaged not only the landscape of North Dakota, but in some ways it damaged the soul of the people of North Dakota, because that kind of funny money, I call it the Saudi effect, when money comes pouring in that you didn't earn. If you asked North Dakotans to pull that oil out of the ground, we couldn't do it. It takes giant multinational corporations with their technologies to come in and do this. And suddenly two ranchers live next to each other. They've been percolating along sort of carefully all their lives. Suddenly one is a billionaire or a multimillionaire, and the other one doesn't have anything because there's no oil under his land. It creates all sorts of 1% kind of issues. On the other hand, it's really important because we were in a serious position about migration and rural decline. Towns were dying. There's a moment in this book where I talked to this friend of mine from a little town called Crosby. He was the newspaper publisher there, and he said, for 30 years, I've been on every committee to try to keep the town alive, a new website. Maybe we can attract a small business. Maybe, we'll give land to anyone who'll come live here. And he said all these things failed, and we were just in decline and depopulation and so on. And he said, and now the oil boom came. Yes, is it too hard, too fast? Is it too disruptive? Of course, but given the choice between death of our town and survival, you have to choose economic development, and that really struck me. So there's a chapter on the oil boom, there's a chapter on the future of North Dakota, there's a chapter on the Little Missouri River Valley, which I find as a kind of a sacred space in the Badlands of North Dakota. There's a chapter on Native Americans, on the search for the sacred. We have 29,000 American Indians, and the white population of North Dakota ignores them at best with benign neglect, and at worst with kind of open hostility, that they just won't get on board with what we take to be the American dream. So it's a serious book that's really wrestling with the decline of rural America, but also the greatness of North Dakota. I absolutely love this place, and I love the character of the people. And so I guess my question is, can we maintain the character of the North Dakota people in a post-agrarian world? That character was generated by agrarianism, the chores on a family farm, the neighborliness, the closeness to the land, the modesty and humility of the North Dakota people. I have friends who are highly successful who didn't get their first new pair of shoes until they were in high school. They lived on hand-me-downs. They had milked the cows before they would take the bus to school. And so now we're living in a much different time when we're deracinated from the land, and we live in the most prosperous moment in North Dakota history. One of the mottos of the book comes from Harold Macmillan, the British Prime Minister, who in 1957 said to the British people, "You've never had it so good." And we North Dakotans have never had it so good, and yet we're one of the Trumpiest states in the Union. Angry about what? And so I'm trying to figure out the identity of North Dakota. I hope this book is bigger than North Dakota. My daughter, who's essentially my best friend, said, "Dad, don't put the words North Dakota in the title. Do you want to sell this thing or don't you?"
It's an interesting title, The Language of Cottonwoods. Cottonwoods, I assume, is that the state tree, or what is that language that you're referencing in the title?
Yes. So there's the last chapter is actually called The Language of Cottonwoods, and I go out. It's about the birth and death cycle of a cottonwood tree. It's fascinating to me. And the cottonwood was so essential to Lewis and Clark. It was essential to the steamboat era. We're the most treeless state in the Union, without a single exception. And so, in fact, most of the trees that exist in the state of North Dakota were planted by humans in shelter belts and soil conservation measures. But the cottonwood is this sort of central thing. And what I'm trying to suggest to the people of North Dakota, and I hope they take it in the spirit that I'm offering it, is that we need to develop a deeper love of this place as place. And so there's a key dichotomy in the book between what I call accidental North Dakotans and naturalized North Dakotans. And so an accidental North Dakotan is someone who just happens to live here, but they'd be just as happy in Bend, Oregon, or Coeur d'Alene. A naturalized North Dakotan is someone who has gotten out and really absorbed the spirit of place, who knows its history and the landscapes, and has an investment in the spiritual thing about the Northern Great Plains. And so the cottonwood tree becomes a kind of metaphor for that. And so the question is, is there anything we can learn from cottonwoods? And I think there is, but it's one of the more lyrical chapters in the book, and it follows a cottonwood tree from birth until death. And it also sort of suggests that until we can learn to appreciate that part of North Dakota, we can't succeed. We have to listen to Native peoples and incorporate their worldview to a certain degree, respect their worldview, because they were living here a lot longer than we have, and they were, frankly, had a more sustainable culture until we came. And we have to learn to love the land. It's not the Grand Tetons. It's not Yosemite. It's not Glacier National Park. It's rolling prairie, and a lot of people who travel through North Dakota say, blah, 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 it's dreary and flat. I don't feel that at all. And I think North Dakotans undervalue the very place that we live in, and because of that, we're willing to sell it for a mess of pottage, because we don't actually, if this were some of the things that are going on in the Little Missouri River Valley out near the Elkhorn Ranch of Theodore Roosevelt, which is part of a national park, by the way, they could not happen in Colorado. There would be a conservation constituency, lovers of Yellowstone, lovers of Rocky Mountain National Park, lovers of Yosemite, who would rise up if they were doing to those landscapes what we now routinely do to our landscapes. And so I think that this underdeveloped spirit of place is the biggest single issue. And no one wants to move to North Dakota. It's a cold, long winter. But they would maybe if they felt that there were something extraordinary about this land and its people, but we haven't proved that yet.
Yeah, it reminds me of Wyoming. I lived in Wyoming for 20 years.
Well, you know that.
And it's funny because some people moved. I mean, there are some people who are fourth-generation ranchers, and they're of the place. But I remember a woman, one of my friends there had moved to K2 television in Casper, Wyoming from San Francisco, and she was a total Californian. And she's still there, and she loves it. And there was just something, I think she told me once, it felt like coming home to her to come to Wyoming with some similar qualities that you're describing from North Dakota, the cowboy culture and whatever.
But you have something we don't have. You have the Rocky Mountains. You have the Green River. You have, I mean, Wyoming is one of the most spectacular landscapes in the world, very light population, but by that standard, North Dakota is a dreary, flat place. And so people want to move there. And by the way, the climate is better there. Not much, but somewhat. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, though.
Well, growing up in Casper, we didn't really consider Teton County part of Wyoming. That was just this, Disneyland place that people flew into.
Exactly. Well, I have friends who say we have a little place out in Jackson Hole, and a little place means a $5 million chalet.
Exactly. How are you reading books? Paper, Kindle, audiobooks? I'm always interested in how people are consuming their
I wish you could see my desk. I have 12 physical or 15 physical books on it. I have my devices where I read. I travel a lot, or used to, and so I have 60, 70 books on my Kindle or on my iPad. I'm an omnivore. I read in every possible way. I live in Bismarck, North Dakota. I'm sure I have the largest library in North Dakota. It's about 20,000 volumes. My house is a library. When I moved in, there was a brand new house, and I got this carpenter to come over, and he said, "What would you like?" And I said, "Shelves." And he said, "Where?" And I said, "Everywhere." And he said, "Everywhere?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You can't mean it." And I said, "No, I mean it. I want every room to have shelves everywhere." And so I do. And now I need an annex. And so it's a disease at this point. It's a mania. But I can't live without books. Jefferson said that, and I can't either. It's I guess to get serious for a moment, I see life through the lens of the humanities, of the great texts, of history, of the history of ideas, of theology, literature. And I can't imagine my life without books in it. And if you said to me, this is like the Faustian bargain, you can live to be 150, but you can't read. Or you're going to die at the age of 74, but you can read. I would take the 74, unless I could fudge it with documentary films or something, but or audiobooks or something. But I can't live without books, and I it's not that I disrespect people who don't, because I respect a very wide range of people with different styles. But for me, some of the greatest moments of my life have been reading Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky or Paradise Lost by Milton. I'm now reading Homer. I'm teaching an online course beginning at the end of September on the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I'm rereading the two great books. I'm using a number of different translations, and I was doing this morning and preparing to talk with you, and I was in book 2 of the Iliad, and I thought, it doesn't get any better than this. It's worth being alive to read Homer, or to read Dante's Inferno, or to read the works of Mark Twain, Roughing It, and Huckleberry Finn. And so that's my life. I suppose I try to read 5 hours a day. I don't always get there, although it's getting easier with the pandemic. And I'm writing now more than ever because of the pandemic, which is great. This will be 4 books this year that I will have written, so I'm fairly well exhausted. The North Dakota book really exhausted me, but I'm having the time of my life, and it has enriched me in every way except monetarily.
Well, I'd like to finish, this will be an experiment, and you can decide whether it succeeded, but would you be willing to go into Jefferson for me to ask him one last question?
Sure, let me do so. We need some kind of Star Trek music. Ding, 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 ding. I'm turning around, I'm spinning, I'm suiting up. Okay, I am now Thomas Jefferson.
Sir, I have been speaking with a friend of yours, Clay Jenkinson. We've had a fascinating conversation here, and many references to you and your life and thought. And if you live to be 83, I believe Clay is in his 60s now, maybe another 20 years of toil and adventure. What advice would you have for Clay Jenkinson as he looks out at his last 2 decades?
Well, first of all, who is this small man pretending to understand my life? I was very private, sometimes almost secretive. I didn't really want historians messing around with certainly the personal details of my life. And so for someone a couple of centuries from now to think that he could master my life or any life strikes me as problematic. But as to advice, I would say spend more time in your garden. Grow some of your own food. Be closer to nature. Nature is the great giver of law, natural law, the law of fairness, of the golden rule, of earning your living from the sweat of your brow and dirt under your fingernails. That these are the most important things in life. And secondly, to remember that if you want to live in a republic, you have to be vigilant all day, every day. You can never turn away that the Hamiltonians and the people who love power and profit and glory and war, they never sleep. They want to dominate civilization because they always have. And so if you want to do something this unusual, to have a people's republic in which people are really sovereign and they protect their liberties against encroachments from outside, they have to stay awake all the time, and they have to be crabby, and they have to be vigilant, and they have to sacrifice their happiness to maintain that delicate model of self-government. And anyone who thinks that you can get a settlement and then turn away into private joy is mistaking what's at stake in the quest for human liberty. So tell that to this scholar.
I will. Okay, now you're back to yourself.
Now I'm me. What? He put me down, that Jefferson.
It's impressive. The voice even changes. It's
changed a little. I used to do more. I used to try to maintain kind of an 18th century Jane Austen cadence, and I do less of that now because I'm trying to think on my feet. But I do definitely. I mean, the character of Jefferson. I'm slangier than Jefferson. I changed the modulation of my voice. I talk at a greater clip than Jefferson. When I get into character, I try to think, well, I can't do the voice. I'm not an actor. We don't even know what he sounded like. But can I be plausibly 18th century in the slight formality of the discourse?
Yeah. Well, it's very effective.
Oh, thank you.
I have been speaking with Clay Jenkinson, director of Public Radio's The Thomas Jefferson Hour and author of Repairing Jefferson's America, A Guide to Civility and Enlightened Citizenship. Thanks very much, Clay.
I've enjoyed this so much. I surely appreciate it. Let's talk again.
I want to read a comment that I received from Dave Slusher, who has a long-running podcast called Evil Genius Chronicles, which I've listened to for years. Hi, hey, Len, hope all is well. I recently purchased the Echo frames as well. In general, I like them a lot. It works well to allow me to occupy myself with listening in a situation I wouldn't normally have a listening opportunity, longer than expected lines at stores, etc. It also lets me listen to podcasts while walking the dog and being less isolated from my neighbors than having my big headphones on. From a physical standpoint, I did find the hard, smooth plastic frame slid down my nose enough to be uncomfortable. To fix that, I bought these. And there's a link that I'll have in the show notes to the nose they're kind of nose pads that you can put on the glasses. I ordered some, but they haven't arrived yet. These stick-on silicone nose pads keep it from sliding down and make the act of wearing much more pleasant. I did also order a second charging cable so I can charge either in my office or by the bedside. Mine will be delivered Wednesday, so hopefully yours has already been delivered. Yes, now I have two. All in all, the Echo frames were the tipping point, as well as Google making more pointless service changes that moved me from the Google Home ecosystem into Alexa. I'm in now, listening to your briefings every morning and generally brought into the experience. Generally bought into the experience. Best D. It was great to hear Dave is listening to the Morning Journal, which I do every week for every day except Sunday for Alexa. I said I've listened to Dave's Evil Genius Chronicles for a while, and I happened to be tuning in to his most recent episode, and I was listening to them on the Echo frames. And I was walking down the beach here toward Old Orchard, the big pier out at Old Orchard. I'm at low tide. I'm walking along, listening to Dave. I love his podcast. It's very, it's intense, it's personal, it's honest, and he's just always exploring ideas. I like the way his mind works. So he was talking about a book that he had heard about. He was deciding, am I going to read it just because I'm going to hate it and rant about it? And it was by a member of my generation, the Boomers. And as he continued talking about it, he had this to say.
What I don't want to do is just take broad shots at the baby boomers. I've done that so much. And in fact, I'll be honest, there is exactly one baby boomer I no longer want to bug. I actually am fine with bugging every other one, basically. And that is listener, host of the Kindle Chronicles, and patron Lena Edgerly, who is a baby boomer and is possibly the only living baby boomer whose opinion I still care about. I have one uncle who's still alive. Pretty much all the baby boomers in my family are dead. But I don't want Len to feel like I'm piling on him. So that's one of the reasons why I back off.
Well, that certainly made me smile as I was walking along the beach listening, and it puts quite a responsibility on me to be the single member of a whole generation that Dave is willing to listen to and that he cares his opinion about. But I really enjoyed that, and I enjoy his podcast. So that was sometimes we'll say thanks for the shout out. When the shout out comes as you're listening to a podcast strolling down the beach and you have no idea that you're going to be mentioned, it's a particularly sweet and salty way to hear it. I don't know who my guest is going to be next week. I've got a couple of possibilities in the coming weeks. Dave Blum, who is editor-in-chief at Audible. I'm talking to his publicist, and also I'm talking to the publicist for Dean Koontz, who has a new novel titled Elsewhere available for pre-order that is going to be delivered in October. Appreciate you listening to my podcast. Have a great day. Bye.